The opinions and statements expressed in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of WWDB, its staff, or management.
Good day, everyone, and welcome again to another edition of Boomer Generation Radio. This is your host, Richard Address, coming to you live from the studios of WWDB AM 860 here in the Delaware Valley and streaming live on WWDBAM.com. And the next portion of Boomer Generation Radio is brought to you by Kendal, a system of not-for-profit communities and services located in 8 states in the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, and near Midwest regions of the United States. Kendal advocates for and empowers older adults to reach their full potential and is committed to working with others to together transform the experience of aging. And to learn more about Kendal, which is Kendal, visit kendal.org. or call toll-free 888-759-0128. That's 888-759-0128. And hopefully on the remote interview line is Paul Greenwood calling in from San Diego. Mr. Greenwood, are you there?
I sure am, Richard. Good morning.
Hey, welcome. Thank you for getting up so early. And how's things in San Diego today? Beautiful as usual?
Well, actually, we're very thankful. We have a little bit of rain, much needed, not enough, but we'll take whatever we can. So a little bit of drizzle and showers this morning.
We have some leftover snow here, if you'd like it. It's still in the parking lot here.
We need some more snow in the Sierra Nevada, so I'll take that too.
Okay. The issue that really, and I thank you, Paul, for calling in to Boomer Generation Radio. The issue is a very serious one, and you've been involved in your professional life as a prosecutor, if I'm not mistaken, assistant district attorney for San Diego County in California, dealing with issues of elder abuse. This is a subject that is rarely discussed. It's one of those, I think, still taboo subjects. Mm-hmm. And the focus of our show here is on baby boomers and what's happening in their families. Talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing. How prevalent is this issue of elder abuse?
Well, it is far more prevalent than we truly understand. And I've been, for the last 18 years, Richard, prosecuting nothing but crimes committed against older adults. I am a product of the baby boomer generation myself. Both my parents, fortunately, are still alive. My mother's 90, my father's 91. My father, sadly, has advanced stages of Alzheimer's, living in a facility in England. But I have been shocked over the last 18 years at the extent of this problem. And 18 years ago, I had no knowledge that it even existed. We'd had specialized prosecutors for child abuse and spousal abuse, but it was a new innovation for us to think that there might be enough cases for a prosecutor like myself. And what we've discovered, unfortunately, Richard, is that it's an epidemic, and it's not just in San Diego, of course, it's throughout the globe, but primarily, of course, we're focusing on the United States. And in every state, there is a significant amount of crimes committed, but the problem is that most of it goes undetected, goes uninvestigated, and therefore unprosecuted.
So you use the word epidemic. That's a rather strong word. What do you mean and by an epidemic?
Well, but it is, because just the statistics alone of the demographics, as we both know, this is why you have a boomer generation program here designed to attract this audience. The over 85s is the fastest growing segment of our population. And as a result, there is a huge portion of that generation that is being victimized right now, and it's increasing. And if my caseload is anything to go by, then it is becoming an epidemic. But the problem and the challenge, Richard, is trying to get people around the country to wake up to this fact and to actually respond and be more aware and be more proactive.
So let's talk about, when you say elder abuse, what exactly are we talking about? Physical abuse? Are we just talking about physical abuse or emotional, financial?
All aspects. It covers obviously the classic punching, slapping, hitting, but it goes beyond that. And of course, whenever I meet people, if I'm traveling, they go, "Oh, and they ask me what I do, and I say elder abuse prosecution. Oh, you mean in nursing homes? I said, well, that's just one little sliver. It happens all over the community. So there's the classic punching, hitting, pushing. There's the elder neglect by specifically caregivers who do not provide the proper care and attention, who literally abandon their patients, don't feed them the right food, don't give them the right medication, etc. And then you've got the emotional or mental suffering that is being inflicted upon seniors, and then abandonment of seniors, dumping them literally on the steps of hospitals and just walking away. And then you've got the whole different area of financial exploitation of seniors, which covers a whole variety of different crimes.
Okay. So I guess I have to ask you the question. You've been doing this for
18 years.
18 years. Why? I mean, this is a silly question, but it's really not a silly question, I guess.
It's not. And it's very unusual for a prosecutor to specialize in one area for so long. And the reason is, Richard, because when I first was given this task, I honestly thought, it doesn't sound too attractive an assignment. I'll do it willingly for 2 to 3 years, and then I'll move back into the real good stuff. And, of course, how wrong was I? Because in the first 5 years, I was prosecuting homicides, sons murdering their mothers. I was prosecuting serious sexual assault cases in facilities. I was prosecuting large sums of elder financial cases. And I realized, my goodness, this is an untapped area. And the frustration that I was hearing from adult protective service workers all across the country was, Greenwood, why aren't other prosecutors seeing what you're seeing? Why aren't other prosecutors doing what you're doing?
Well, again, why is this happening? What is it about that you're finding, or what is it in your experience in this society that is causing this epidemic of people abusing older adults?
Well, sadly, there's a cultural thing about ageism, Richard. Unfortunately, victims of crimes who are over a certain age don't appear to get the same kind of level of attention as younger victims. Because you always hear on the media when a child tragically is killed, but you don't always hear when an 85-year-old is murdered by their own child. You also have the problem when there isn't a homicide, but you get a financial exploitation, that very often the crime is not reported by the victim because of embarrassment or fear or some other reason, such as cognitive inability to recognize that they are a victim. And then you've got that other challenge, which is that law enforcement sometimes does not take these cases seriously enough. Or if there is an allegation of financial exploitation, the law enforcement can fall into the trap of thinking that it's a civil matter, and will basically tell the family to go away and go find a lawyer. And very often, these cases are not just, quote, civil. They do, in fact, lead to proper criminal charges if, in fact, the detective does the right job.
Is there training, developing training for law enforcement officers as well as prosecutors on this issue, or is it something that people have to learn by just doing it in experience?
No, there is training, and in fact, what is interesting, what's encouraging is that there is more and more training now being offered. There's more and more grants being issued around the country for states and counties within states to train local law enforcement on how to recognize these activities of crimes, how to respond, how to investigate. And there are also trainings nationally for prosecutors like myself on how to convert these investigations into aggressive, effective prosecutions. One of the biggest issues that I faced early on, I would go around to law enforcement agencies in my county and say, why don't you bring me these cases? And the answer that I got everywhere I went, Richard, was, Greenwood, you don't want to touch these cases. And I would ask, well, why not? And they would say, because elderly people make poor witnesses in the courtroom. Well, nothing could be further from the truth, but that's the misconception that is out there, and it unfortunately pervades even into prosecutors' offices. A lot of prosecutors are fearful of putting on a 95-year-old victim because they are afraid that because of forgetfulness or whatever, it's going to make for a poor case. But invariably these witnesses are very, very effective. And, of course, they have such jury appeal.
Mm-hmm. Are you finding an increase in financial abuse?
Yes. And as a result, I spend a lot of my time, Richard, actually going out into the community, trying to educate not only the boomer generation, because that is the audience that needs to be hearing this message. People like myself who have 90-year-old parents or 80-year-old parents, they need to understand that their parents are at tremendous risk of being taken advantage of. So it's education of that group, but it's also educating the professionals. Finally, about 5 years ago in California, after much advocacy by prosecutors and law enforcement and other folks, we got the California legislature to make every single bank teller in the state of California a mandated reporter of suspected financial exploitation of an elder. And so now we see an increase in the reporting coming in to law enforcement, because so often, as we know, the scams are rife. You know, one of the most popular ones right now is the grandma scam, you know, where the crook calls up the unsuspecting grandma, pretending to be the grandson, telling his grandmother that he's in jail in British Columbia or in Mexico City. He's been down here for a friend's wedding, and he's in jail because he had too much to drink and he crashed the rental car. So he gets grandma, unsuspectingly, to withdraw $5,000 from her bank or credit union, go over to Walmart and use MoneyGram to transfer the money, $5,000, to what they think is the grandson's lawyer. And it's happening every single day in the United States of America. So it's things like that where the bank tellers need to be aware. When an 85-year-old widow walks into the bank and says, "Can I withdraw $5,000 in cash?" it should immediately send alarm bells ringing in that branch.
And so now the law of California is that the bank tellers are mandated reporters.
They have to report if they suspect. Reasonable suspicion is all they need. And the great thing is that so many financial institutions are worried about being sued by their customer for interfering, but that's not going to happen when you are a mandated reporter.
We're speaking with Paul Greenwood from the District Attorney's Office in San Diego County about this, as he says, epidemic of elder abuse, really taking apart not only physical but emotional and financial. And we're going to be back with Paul in a minute, but I just want to remind our audience that this portion of Boomer Generation Radio is brought to you by Kendal Outreach, serving the field of aging by raising public awareness and advocacy around the important issues of older adults. Through education, training, and implementation of comprehensive approaches to safe, individualized, long-term care practices, Kendal Outreach has been sharing Kendal's approach to quality care with consumers, advocates, providers, government agencies, and related organizations since 1989. To learn more, visit kendal.org, that's Kendal.org, and click on Outreach. Kendal Outreach, again, Kendal.org, and click on Outreach. Paul, I imagine you're also involved with this, from what we're hearing, growing trend of computer online scams. Do you get involved? I'm sure you do get involved with that.
Yes, unfortunately, many elders who have become more acquainted with computers in the last 10 years are getting these unsolicited emails, and I mean, we all get them, but most of us, unfortunately, don't respond to them. But a lot of elders are curious, particularly where I just had one the other day from one of my acquaintances in England. Well, of course, it wasn't. It was from the crook who had got into their account and given me the sad story that they were stranded in the Ukraine and they needed me to wire £1,500 over to them. I mean, seniors are getting the same kind of emails. They're getting offers of ridiculous investment opportunities which don't exist. And this is the problem, Richard. When they fall for this and when they do succumb to transferring what is large sums of money to these crooks, and when they discover that it's a scam, they don't tell anybody. And I've had so many victims that we've uncovered. And when I meet with them, and I gently asked them, why didn't you say anything? Their immediate response was, Mr. Greenwood, the last person that I want to find out about this is my own children, because I'm afraid what they might do if they found out.
Do you go to like senior centers and assisted living facilities and CCRCs to do educational programs to alert older adult populations on this?
I do, and I've learned by mistake, never in winter, never at night. I can never compete with the Wheel of Fortune, because that's what the seniors will never get out of their chairs to go to hear me speak. It's always got to be at lunchtime with an attractive message, because people have, in well-meaning people have put flyers in their local retirement facilities. Come and hear Deputy District Attorney Paul Greenwood talk about elder abuse. Nobody wants to come and hear that.
Thanks a lot. Right.
But if we translate it into come and hear Deputy District Attorney Paul Greenwood tell you how you can prevent yourself becoming a victim of identity theft, that's a positive message.
Right.
And so people will come, and I always try to keep the message positive, because even though what you and I are talking about can, in one sense, be very discouraging, the tone has to be upbeat. It has to be positive. It has to be, we've got to take control. We've got to be savvy. And we've got to be on the lookout for our less fortunate colleagues who may already be victims of elder abuse.
Other than, I guess, what you just talked about, this sense of embarrassment, a sense of fear,
Correct.
What are some of the other challenges that in prosecuting these cases that you face?
Well, once we've got through that, and once we've got the information, it's amazing, really, how we can corroborate the evidence through so many different means. I think the initial hurdle is making sure that we get that information from the bank teller, from the neighbor, from the rabbi, from the pastor, from all kinds of people. So then I can work with the victim. And even though victims may come to court with a certain degree of memory impairment, it doesn't matter, because jurors understand, particularly when I have a financial exploitation case, I can tell you, Richard, that when jurors see my victim and when they see the defendant and they understand the impairment issues that my victim is grappling with, my jurors don't tolerate that behavior by the defendant. They know exactly why it is the defendant took advantage of this particular victim. I mean, I'm fortunate. I have a tremendous support staff. I have paralegal. I have a victim advocate. I have investigators. So I have a lot of different people who can provide the background information that I need. For example, before they come to court, does my victim need a hearing aid? Do they need eyeglasses? Do they need additional oxygen? So these are all things that we have learned over the years to be prepared for, so that the day in court can be minimally disruptive for the victim.
How difficult is it to prosecute these cases? How difficult it is to really get the people who are perpetrating these frauds, scams, etc.?
The crooks out there who hide behind the internet, behind the telephone that they pick up at Walmart, and it's a track phone which you can very rarely track down, actually. Those are very difficult to find. You have to have some luck. You have to have some hard-working detectives who are willing to do search warrants. So those cases are indeed very frustrating. And I'm still tackling those. And I haven't been very successful in 18 years in catching those kind of crooks who often are overseas or out of the country, maybe in Canada or other places. But locally, it's very much a different story. We are able to issue many, many cases. And in fact, Richard, I'm blessed by the fact that in San Diego, within the San Diego Police Department, we have 5 dedicated detectives in one investigative unit. That's all they do, is investigate these elder crimes. So I get quality investigations being brought to me every single day by these detectives.
Do other jurisdictions around the country, to the best of your knowledge, have such dedicated officers and a person in the DA's office to focus on these crimes, or is this unique to San Diego?
It's not unique, but it is sporadic, unfortunately. And what it requires, Richard, is the leader of the prosecutor's office and the chief of the local police to be talking with one another and to understand together that elder abuse crimes are going to be one of the biggest challenges in the criminal justice system in the next 10 years. I'm not being overdramatic. I'm being realistic. And it's going to take vision and somebody with absolute passion for protecting the elderly that is going to say, okay, I'm going to dedicate 1, 2, 3 prosecutors in my office to prosecuting these crimes. And slowly but surely, it's happening around the country. It's happening in Philadelphia area, in Bucks County, I know, in other places around Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Gradually, the message is getting through.
If somebody's a victim of elder abuse, especially physical abuse, or I know there's a place in New York City in one of the Jewish homes that has a dedicated unit for victims of elder abuse. Do you have places where you can refer people, actually safe homes? I know that they exist for spousal abuse and child abuse, but do they exist in your knowledge out there or around the country a lot?
No. In fact, the one you just referred to in New York is a wonderful example of what it should be like all over the country. And that is one of the biggest problems that we face is where an elder needs to be. What I try to do, though, is keep the elderly victim in the place to which they are most familiar. So if they've been abused in their own home, it's typically by a family member. So hopefully we can arrest that person, get them out of the home, have them on a high bail with a no contact so they don't have the opportunity to go back to that home. But then the problem is we may just have removed the one single caregiver, and I use that term loosely, caregiver,
right,
who has at least been in the home. So the next problem is how do we fill that void? And that's where I work with our local adult protective services to try to make sure that that victim is being properly cared for and doesn't become a victim again.
We only have a couple of minutes left before we have to end here on the Kendal segment of Boomer Generation Radio. But I guess I have to ask this question: what do you look for? What do you look for? Are there telltale signs? Like you said at the beginning of the segment, people may be dealing with some cognitive impairment. They may have fallen and have a bruise that may be perfectly normal. Real quickly, what do we look for if to see if this physical abuse, it's hard, I imagine, with financial or other, but what do you look for?
Great question. Number one, isolation. Once neighbors, family members see that the elderly relative is being isolated, which was totally different from what normally happens, particularly where a new person has come into their life, then that is immediately should be responded to with a call to their local adult protective services and or their local police department for a welfare check. If you do see an older adult for the first time in several weeks and their appearance has changed, they've lost weight, they look disheveled, or you see indications of memory impairment, if you're in their home and the phone is constantly ringing, if you see bills unpaid, those are all indicators that something is amiss. And I'm constantly, Richard, I'll wrap up with this. I'm constantly telling Boomer Generation folks, you have got to stay in touch daily with your parents. My mother, 90 years of age, lives 6,000 miles away, but I made a commitment to her 18 months ago. I am going to phone you every single morning before I go to work. And I try to do that without fail because that's the only way I can keep track of her movements and to make sure that nobody has come into her life that shouldn't be there and to make sure that everything is fine.
Paul, thank you very much. We've been speaking with Paul Greenwood from the District Attorney's Office in San Diego County, who's been prosecuting issues and cases of elder abuse. And I want to thank you, Paul, very much for a ton of really great information. And I hope people who listen to this and then listen to the podcast later on really take to heart of what you're saying. And I just want to thank you again and also remind our audience that this portion of Boomer Generation Radio has been brought to you by Kendal, the Kendal Corporation, a system of not-for-profit communities and services that advocates for and empowers older adults to reach their full potential. Together we are transforming the experience of aging, and to learn more about Kendal, that's Kendal, we invite you to visit kendal.org or call toll-free at 888-759-0128. That's Kendal, Kendal, at kendal.org, and the toll-free number again is 888-759-0128. And again, thank you to Paul Greenwood for being our guest here on this segment, the Kendal segment of Boomer Generation Radio.